Welcome back to Room 231 News. We are your anchors,
Alex Benson,
and Tessa Marconi.
Next April marks the 20-year anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, the worst domestic terrorist attack in American history.
This tragic day claimed the lives of 168 innocent people and injured hundreds more.
To commemorate this tragic event, we are presenting an in-depth review of the events leading up to the attack and the response from the American people.
But first, let's take a look at the breaking news report on April 19, 1995, covering the bombing. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a breaking news report.
We are getting word that at 9:02 this morning, an explosion erupted at the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. We have a chopper in the area to give us a closer look.
We do not know the cause of the explosion, but we can see that half of the Murrah building has been completely destroyed.
We are also not sure of the casualty count at this time, but we do know the Murrah building employs over 550 workers. We also know that there's a daycare center located near the blast zone.
At this point, we can only hope for the best and brace for the worst. We will be sure to keep you updated as we learn new information. And now we will take an in-depth look at the attack.
Timothy McVeigh was born on April 23, 1968 in Lockport, New York. As a young child, McVeigh became obsessed with learning survival skills. He learned extensively about weapons and stocked up on food in case of a nuclear attack as a result of the Cold War. McVeigh grew up with strict anti-communist views, which eventually evolved into a hatred of the American government. McVeigh joined the military at 20 and fought in the Gulf War, where he received a Bronze Star. When he was in the military, he became friends with a man named Terry Nichols, after realizing that they both didn't like a centralized government. After failing to qualify for Special Forces training, McVeigh was honorably discharged from the military in 1991. After he left the military, McVeigh worked odd jobs for little pay, all while looking to move to a state without strict government restrictions.
One instance that further angered McVeigh was the incident at Ruby Ridge, where Kevin Harris, Randy Weaver, and Weaver's family were involved in a standoff with U.S. Marshals. The conflict ended with the death of Weaver's son and a U.S. Marshal. 1 year later, in 1993, McVeigh drove out to witness the Waco siege, where FBI and ATF officers attempted to capture David Koresh, who's hiding out in his Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. When Koresh failed to cooperate, the FBI and ATF grew frustrated. On April 19, 1993, a fire broke out in the compound, and all those who were inside perished, including women and children. McVeigh believed there was a conspiracy, and that the government had something to do with the fire. These two occurrences angered McVeigh and radicalized him. After Ruby Ridge and Waco, McVeigh wanted revenge, and he would kill anybody to get his message across.
McVeigh thought that the best way to get his message across was to kill federal agents on a large scale. He began to search the country for federal buildings that housed FBI and ATF agents, but had few civilian bystanders. McVeigh originally looked at federal buildings in Little Rock, Arkansas, but decided against it because of a floral shop on the first floor. McVeigh then settled on the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The federal building housed federal agents from the FBI and the ATF. The building was also located in a fairly open area, which would allow for easy filming of the destruction.
To complete the task, McVeigh acquired the help of his friend Terry Nichols. Over a period of a couple months, McVeigh and Nichols began stockpiling ammonium nitrate fertilizer for the construction of the bomb. They planned the attack for April 19, 1995, which would be the 2-year anniversary of the siege at Waco. On April 15th, McVeigh rented a Ryder moving truck under the alias Robert Kling, and McVeigh and Nichols began constructing the 4,800-pound explosive device. On April 19th, McVeigh parked the rental truck in a drop-off zone below the daycare center at the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. At 9:02, with McVeigh watching from a few blocks away, the bomb exploded. The explosion killed 168 people, including 19 children.
McVeigh escaped in an unlicensed vehicle and headed north. 90 minutes later, a police officer pulled over McVeigh for not having a license plate. When the police officer noticed that McVeigh was carrying an unlicensed firearm, he arrested McVeigh.
Back in Oklahoma City, rescue efforts were still going strong. By 9:03, hundreds of 911 calls were received, and police and firefighters were sent to the scene. Thousands of rescue workers worked tirelessly to rescue survivors of the attack. By 10 o'clock, 50 people had been rescued from the building. Victims were sent to all surrounding hospitals. Around 7 p.m. on April 19th, the final surviving victim, a 15-year-old girl, was rescued from the Murrah building. Multiple organizations such as the State Emergency Operations Center, the Air Force, and the American Red Cross worked for weeks rescuing victims, recovering bodies, and providing treatment for the injured. In the days and weeks following the blast, over 12,000 people participated in relief and rescue operations. On May 5th, rescue efforts ended when all but 3 of the bodies had been found.
The national aid efforts were immediate. Thousands of things were donated, ranging from bottled water to football helmets. The Oklahoma Restaurant Association served up to 20,000 meals over a 10-day period to rescue workers. The Salvation Army served thousands of meals and donated thousands of things like ponchos and hard hats for the rescue workers. Residents from the area donated 9,000 units of blood in total, although only 131 units were used.
At 9:45 on April 19, 1995, Governor Frank Keating declared a state of emergency and ordered all non-essential employees in the Oklahoma City area be released from work for their safety. By 9:30, President Clinton received word of the bombing while he was in a meeting with the Turkish Prime Minister. At 4 p.m., President Clinton addressed the nation about the attack. President Clinton ordered that American flags at federal buildings be flown up half-mast for 30 days to honor the victims. Although there was no federal financial assistance, the Murrah Fund was set up during the weeks of the bombing, and it received over $300,000 in federal grants. Donations to the city to aid the disaster relief and compensate the victims reached $40 million. By 2005, $18 million remained, and some of the money was set aside as college tuition for some of the 219 children who lost one or both their parents in the bombing.
The Murrah building was demolished on May 23, 1995 for safety reasons. McVeigh's attorney, Stephen Jones, filed a motion to delay the demolition of the building so that the defense team could inspect it. Following the demolition, the final 3 bodies were recovered. For days following the demolitions, trucks hauled hundreds of tons of debris each day from the site. The debris was used as evidence, incorporated into memorials, and sold to raise funds for the relief.
For years following the attack, the only memorial to honor victims were toys, letters, crucifixes, and other personal items left by thousands of people at the fence surrounding the site where the Murrah building once stood. A committee in charge of planning an official memorial was set up in 1996. On June 1, 1997, the winning design for the memorial was chosen unanimously by the 15-person committee. The memorial cost $29 million to design and build, but the money was raised by public and private funds. The memorial was dedicated by President Clinton on April 19, 2000, exactly 5 years after the bombing.
The psychological effects of the bombing are very clear. Studies have been conducted to determine the psychiatric impact of the bombing on survivors of the direct blast. 182 survivors were assessed by interviews between August and December 1995. 45% of the survivors had a post-disaster psychiatric disorder, and 34.3% suffered from PTSD, and 76% of survivors reported same-day onset of PTSD. Studies show that PTSD, as well as major forms of depression, is much more prevalent in the primary victims of the attack rather than the rescue workers. However, alcohol use disorder was higher in rescue workers than in primary victims. Among all firefighters, bombing-related PTSD was diagnosed in 13%, and any post-disaster psychiatric disorder in 38%.
An immediate effect of the bombing was that it exposed how relaxed security was in federal buildings. Following the attack, security measures around federal and significant buildings in the U.S. increased tenfold. In the wake of the attack, a lot of new legislation was passed by Congress. Hearings were held and anti-terror legislation was passed. Legislation included the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996 and the Victim Allocution Act of 1997. However, the new legislation passed did not ease the new fears of Americans. The bomb upset the illusion that America was a country safe from political unrest and terrorism outside its borders. The bombing showed people that the extreme right and homegrown terrorists did exist and posed a real threat to American safety. In 2010, President Clinton said he believed that the threat of homegrown terrorism was greater now because of the reach of the internet and its influence. Clinton also said that the impact of political attacks could be amplified due to the economic upheaval.
The Oklahoma City bombing was the worst terrorist attack on American soil until the bombing of the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001. The bombing of the Twin Towers pushed aside the fear of the extreme right and homegrown terrorists and moved American focus towards Middle Eastern terrorists. However, the Oklahoma City bombing remains to this day as the worst domestic terrorist attack on American soil.
What made the Oklahoma City bombing such a wide-reaching attack was the fact that some of the victims were children. There was a daycare center in the Murrah building for parents who worked in the building. The daycare was situated very close to where McVeigh parked the rented Ryder truck, so it received a massive amount of the blast. The most famous photograph of the attack, a photo that came to symbolize the attack itself, was of a firefighter holding the dying body of a very young girl. In the weeks and years following the attack, that photo showed up constantly.
On August 10, 1995, McVeigh was charged on 11 federal counts, which included conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, use of a weapon of mass destruction, destruction by explosives, and 8 counts of first-degree murder. On February 20, 1996, the case was formally moved to Oklahoma City. McVeigh and his defense attorneys argued that the bombing was a justifiable response to the events at Waco and Ruby Ridge. The prosecutors used evidence from the federal investigation of the bombing named OK Bomb. Terry Nichols was charged on similar counts but ended up serving life in prison without parole. However, Nichols wasn't sentenced to death because he was not the mastermind behind the attack, but was a co-conspirator.
On June 2, 1997, McVeigh was found guilty on all 11 charges, and on June 13th, McVeigh was sentenced to death by lethal injection.
On June 11, 2001, at 7:14 a.m., McVeigh was executed. McVeigh chose to quote William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus as his final statement. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul.
In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but I'm bowed.
Beyond this place of wrath and tears, looms but the horror of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds me and shall find me unafraid.
It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul.
31 News, with an in-depth look at the Oklahoma City bombing to commemorate the 20th anniversary coming up next April. Thank you.
Thank you.